What's your plan for tomorrow? Are you a leader? Are you a follower? Are you a fighter or will you cower? It's our time to take back the power. What's your plan for tomorrow? Are you a leader or will you follow? Are you a fighter or will you cower? It's our time to take back the power. What you gonna do when they show up in black suits on the street and army boots? And they're there to silence you. What you gonna say when they skip your rights away and the tax man makes you pay for every day that's what you get today? We don't need to run and home, and we won't push off to the side. What's your plan for tomorrow? Are you a leader or will you follow? Are you a fighter or will you cower? It's our time to take back the power. What's your plan for tomorrow? Are you a leader or will you follow? Are you a fighter or will you cower? It's our time to take back the power. Who you gonna trust when the judge is so unjust and the jury must discuss that you don't look like one of us? Where you gonna turn? Now the court has been adjourned, and the lesson that you learned, the bridge is burned. We don't need to run and push off to the side. What's your plan for tomorrow? Are you a leader or will you follow? Are you a fighter or will you cower? It's our time to take back the power for tomorrow. Are you a leader or will you follow? Are you or will you cower? It's our time to take back the power. We want, we want to push off to the side. What's your plan for tomorrow? Are you a leader or will you follow? Are you a fighter or will you cower? It's our time to take back the power.
Well, all right, all right, all right. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whenever you happenstance into this Truth Bomb riff and the 555th one over the course of about 2.5 years. These are part lecture, part sermon, part therapy to contend with the chaos and the carnage of everything that is happening, given everything that we're all in the midst of, and unfortunately, everything I know. So today I'm experimenting with a recording while I'm hosting an X Spaces live concerning all that is in context of all that could be if somehow we can connect with millions of people to deliver the truth into the hearts and minds of liberty and justice for all patriots who become a nuclear reaction vector to the big bang of truth that I'm delivering that can and will force the light of truth into the depravity of darkness to purge the misery of tyranny and fascism to usher in the renaissance of possibility. And that is our destiny, my friends, the clean new deal. So look, a lot has happened this past week, and I know we're all kind of what the fuck on overdrive, right? So we saw last night or a couple of days ago the Elon Musk and X show in the Trump with Trump in the Oval Office that looked like literally a cover of Mad Magazine. Then last night there was the Hannity interview, and then of course what we saw yesterday that took place in Saudi with, of course, Marco Rubio, little Marco, our current Secretary of State, and then of course the Saudis and those from Moscow, and then of course everything from Doge to the executive orders, and then of course the revelation that the Democratic Party has been shattered into a million pieces, and they really can't respond effectively given everything that's been going on. And so given all that I've been putting out there, both on X, both in my YouTube channel, and then all of the other elements that combined to try to assess and deliver to those that are listening and to those that will hopefully come on board, get involved with the Clean New Deal and share, is the composite four questions. So the questions you have to understand are, who am I? Who is Patrick Lovell? Why do you care? What is the con? What is Federal Reserve Act 13.3, and what is the Clean New Deal? So before I launch into that and just kind of go off on the next step of this, I'm looking at quite a few people that are here, and I thank you all for joining. And I would encourage you to raise your hand if you have anything to add at the top of this, either in reaction to the things that you know that I've been putting out there, or if you just want to talk about what's going on in the general marketplace or the arena that we're all in the midst of. So please raise your hand. I see that I'm going to put you all on that have requested, and then we'll ask you to speak ahead of time so that we can try to get a bearing of what people know. Let's take a look here. It looks like Roseanne, you have been added. Why don't you start us off?
Hi, Patrick. I'm Roseanne. I'm an old hippie from the 60s, and all I know is we cannot remain silent because, my friends, silence is not golden. Whoever made up the phrase silence is golden, we have to get the truth out there. Thank you, Pam. Thank you so much. We have to talk. We have to talk to everybody we come in contact with. I stop people in parking lots. I smile at people first, okay? Thank you, organizer. Thank you. Yeah, we gotta do it because we never know how far that smile, that truth, that sharing will go. Look at all the people here. What kind of impact do we have? I believe we have monumental impact because it keeps going and going and going. Thank you again. Listen, talk. I wanna hear.
So yeah, let me kind of set the table here real quick and see if people respond to this. So my friends, there has been an urgency to everything that we've been delivering now for many years, actually, and it's been an odyssey and a journey, and it's had different realms of coming up against the Borg and so forth. I recall like 6 months ago yelling at and screaming from the mountaintops to those in mainstream media, particularly the likes of Rachel Maddow, that you can't see the forest for the trees. You're hyper focusing on Trump. It's Elon. You need to take a look at. You guys need to understand what's going on with X. They didn't do anything until literally the last day of the election. As I recall, that the New York Times did a piece as to why Elon has such an entrenched interest, particularly as it relates to the Pentagon. And the Pentagon was quoted as saying, or the spokesperson, whomever they interviewed at the Pentagon, was that Elon responds to the speed of threat assessment. And I found that incredible given the fact that I've been interpreting Elon Musk as Spectre now for at least the last year, particularly once he put together the cabal of the private equity interests, the too big to fail banks, the Saudi sovereign wealth fund, which I was like, what? Here's Mr. Clean Energy Paradigm. That was now suddenly in cahoots with the world's largest fossil fuel sort of interest by way of how involved Saudi is involved with pretty much every aspect of the American economy and a lot of the global economy, and further, and not to mention, I think I mentioned private equity, but we found out later, a couple of billionaire oligarchs out of Russia, and so mainstream ignored Elon with his silliness and jumping up and down on the campaign trail, especially after the day that Trump was supposedly and the assassination attempt in Pennsylvania and everything that construes. But Elon came to the table with a lot of money. He ended up putting $277 million into the campaign that we all know, anybody who's been paying attention, that some of the prescient work by a journalist by the name of Greg Palast had revealed that there's been over 3.5 million votes that were suppressed. So this is part of the old Jim Crow sort of evolution, as well as what was happening in Wisconsin. And that would have been the difference in the election right there. But of course, the election had 13 million less than what showed up in 2020 for Biden. Not to mention, we have literally, I think, 80 million people that sit it out, right? So we were already in a crisis for the democracy years and years ago. Now we have a massive constitutional crisis because of all things Doge and the illegal hijacking of this insanity that's been going on with the likes of Big Balls, for example. And what I did a couple of days ago is I had an interview on my YouTube page with the prolific William K. Black, who is the greatest criminologist that the country has ever created, not to mention his wife, June Carbone, who is one of the premier legal scholars on white collar fraud. And what they laid out was that what we're in the midst of, guys, especially what's happening with Elon, with Doge, and so-called, I don't know, the thousands of layoffs that have taken place. You got to understand, my friends, that corporate America has been behaving this way since the 80s. There's a methodology to it. It really kind of came into stark focus on overdrive with the CEO of General Electric, a gentleman by the name of, I could call him gentleman loosely, but Jack Welch, who created this CEO control fraud, I should say, that was meant through short-term profits to boost bonuses through modern executive compensation by using a technique called yank and rank. So you basically would get rid of the lower 20%. You'd create a kind of a piranha feeding frenzy of who would lie, steal, and cheat on overdrive to present the numbers that would make it look like the stock was boosting for the short term. That was in the 80s. Imagine how much more has taken place over the course of the last 35 years. And then, of course, we arrive at the world's richest guy who threw $277 million into the campaign. And then, of course, since Trump got elected, Elon has made, on paper, north of $181 billion in the span of about 2 months. Who out there is not wondering what the fuck led to that sort of wealth appreciation in a tiny, tiny period of time? That might have been, quite frankly, on paper, and given the fundamentals of Tesla, by the way, they're not selling more Teslas. Tesla's inventory and stock started to feel the heat, but it's more to the point of his intrinsic control of government, honestly, and that's what his position is control of government. Think about that. A guy from apartheid South Africa who meanders through his educational sort of river of life into Canada and then into Stanford, that then winds up at PayPal. PayPal being the first version of, quite frankly, digital currency, the way it manifests, which led to him selling and making $200 million that he flipped into Tesla. And he, of course, didn't create Tesla. But Tesla started to blow up right around the time of when I got in the game because of what took place after the great financial crisis in 2008. When Obama came into office to offset the losses of what took place in the horse trading behind the scenes, of which I'm revealing to you as a big part of what we're in the midst of, there was about a $700 billion incentive package that the government was able to throw a lot into Tesla, for example, which then led to the guarantee of Tesla, which then drove market forces. Now, over the course of 14 years, Elon has overcome the shorts, he's overcome a lot of things, but then there was pump and dump schemes, there was meme stock valuations, and all sorts of basically fraud, not to mention being a welfare queen because of SpaceX, among other things, during the time of COVID and so forth, where he tripled and quadrupled his wealth. I think he went from like 141 billion to like 281 billion, and now we're up to like 400 and I don't know, 74 billion. I mean, it's unbelievable that millions of people are sitting on their ass as the ultimate abomination of what this country was started from in the revolution to basically kick King George III and the aristocracy, which is the oligarchy of their time, through the West India Trading Company, and of course, all power from naval power to the Redcoats, which is the strongest military in the world at that time, where we created, after the revolution, of course, separation of powers and the Bill of Rights, and then thus begins the long journey of the United States, for better or for worse, in order to form a more perfect union and all of the history. But my friends, we're in a situation right now where this we've lost the democracy completely. I don't know if there's going to be a midterms. So ask yourself this: if Donald Trump and company could walk clean from the insurrection, basically hijack the Supreme Court, have the Supreme Court etch a sketch the Constitution and American history by literally whitewashing the 14th Amendment, Section 3, among other things, and then ultimately crown him above the law. They knighted him a king, which is the antithesis of the American Revolution in the history since, notwithstanding our war against fascism and, of course, whatever, all of everything that came out of civil rights to turn the tables on Jim Crow. So here we are. I'm looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I was hoping to get 100, but we know that these things get listened to by thousands of people. So thank you for joining us. That's just kind of an introduction to what it is that I want to lay out to you. But I want to ask anybody at the moment to chime in. And I see my friend Reagan is here from Alberta, Canada, who has incredible information about the oil deposits of tar sands that act as collateral for the United States global reserve currency. And I'm going to ask Reagan to maybe give an introduction to folks about what you're hearing from me, what you're seeing in your neck of the woods, especially post the so-called tariffs in Canada, and of course, all of the things that have happened since. But to give our listeners and everybody joining here some perspective on what you know we're in the midst of and what we're formulating to try to drive forward. I'm going to give you permission to speak now.
Hi, Roseanne. Hi, Patrick.
Hi.
My name's Reagan. I'm a political. Hi, Roseanne. I'm a political economist and a historian up here in Canada. And the reason I'm here is because what I've been studying, the games and the crimes up here in Alberta, trying to make sense of the oil and gas industry, what they led me to was what I was staring at was control fraud. I found Bill Black. That led me to Patrick. And I've been studying, I've been on to this same game for 6, 7, 8 years, uncovering it and documenting it. And I've come to the conclusion that Patrick's Clean New Deal, the Americans changing how America runs, is the only hope we have up here in Canada. The control, the ownership exerted up here is insurmountable, except for the rule of law back home. And it is possible. It has been done before. Patrick has the answers, and that's how we pay for the decent world is obviously possible. If Elon can have that much, then surely the rest of us can get by just fine. And so the Clean New Deal is the best hope for everyone else. I'm here as the international wing, cheering you on, because Patrick's answers are the answers everywhere else in the world. That's imperialism. He's describing the heart of Wall Street, and that's what's feeding on the rest of us. And there is no rule of law anywhere else out here. But back in America, you could save us all.
And Reagan, again, I'm just so grateful we've connected. And again, this is kind of a composite sort of what's the word I'm looking at? Paradox, if you will, of social media. Look, we all know X is just a sewer of just trash, and it's just absolutely horrific. And we also know that it's just the antithesis of free speech. However, here I am using the platform to connect with people around the world, and I'm so grateful that you're here and we have this opportunity, because just the past few days, for example, on President's Day in my neck of the woods, I just happenstanced into a pretty significant protest, and it encompassed about several thousand people of all walks of life. And the chant was "No more Nazis." I was so blown away by that, because that's truly the impetus from where I'm coming from. And a lot of you have seen my post on X, and some of you are probably concerned for my safety, but I got to be honest with you. I could give a flying fuck what fascists and maggots think about me, because I am going to push them back off the cliff, because this is intolerable. The thing about America to me, and has been my whole life, and I'm 56 years old. I'm not a young man anymore. I wish I was had the strength that I did when I was 30 years old. I promise you I'd be a lot more effective. But the long and the short of it is that fascism is the end game here, okay? Because fascism is just an expression of tyranny. It doesn't matter if it's aristocracy, it doesn't matter if it's oligarchy, it doesn't matter, quite frankly, if it's the Politburo. A degree of fascism is just going to be complete and utter, defined as right wing, obviously, but it's the fusion of the corporate state, for the power, and of course the dictator. And that's exactly what we saw with Project 2025 and the libertarian wet dream to create a CEO dictator over the course of 25 years. Now, you have to understand that the Koch enterprises and all of their verticals and their think tanks created the Heritage Foundation and much, much more, and fueled it the entire time. And as many of you know, the Koch brothers are some of the wealthiest, now deceased, but they're obviously, their verticals are still there and doing the work that they set out to do long ago. But the nature of the Koch brothers began with their father, Fred Koch, not to be confused with Fred Trump. Fred Koch literally built the infrastructure of Stalin's oil capacity, which is one of the largest in the world. And I've known my whole life, because I'm from Texas. My family's from the oil and gas industry. So I grew up understanding the deposits in that area of the world, and how huge Russia's oil resources were, which of course during World War II had a huge role to play in them defeating the Nazis as well, right? So the continuity in the continuum of the strong arm, and trust me, Stalin was no communist. Stalin was the mob boss. I mean, no different than the Romanovs, really, in terms of control because of the Politburo. But the sort of evolution in the United States, which is just insane, when you think of both Fred Trump, which is Donald Trump's father, and his grandfather. Fred Trump had a white collar fraud apparatus, and so did his grandfather. In fact, his grandfather was a pimp, a literal pimp, in the camps up in Alaska, and I believe in probably Washington as well, during the gold rush. And all of this stuff has been ongoing, which led to Donald Trump inheriting $400 million. He went bankrupt 6 times in his career, but the guy has been Don the Con, Mafia Don, for decades. And he was just made, shall we say, normalized in mainstream media because of all the things that we saw with, of course, him being involved with celebrity culture, guests on everything from David Letterman back in the day to all over the now we can laugh about it, National Enquirer, but it's not really laughable when you consider what Donald Trump got nailed on at 34 criminal convictions, i.e. Quashing Stormy Daniels and everything that came with it. But Don has been running from the law and getting away from DAs and prosecutors who have failed to hold him to account for 4 decades. He's been a fraud the whole time. The only thing he got nailed on where he admitted culpability was when he was selling fraudulent predatory loans at Trump University. I don't know who didn't know this before 2016, let alone 2025. But as we've seen and as we've moved forward through all of these other impetuses, and I want to just segue to this really quick. When the January 6th committee investigated Donald Trump, they wanted to put the entirety of the insurrection on Don as the mastermind. When anybody who understands who Donald Trump is knows that Donald Trump is a mastermind of nothing. The guy is a gluttonous pig for corruption, and he's just a jitball idiot who knows nothing. How many people have seen that Trump's on the golf course today for like what, the fourth time this week? Meanwhile, flying back and forth on Air Force One and a $2.5 million that are involved with all of the security every time he flies on it, not to mention a flyover for some, President's Day propaganda situation, the Daytona 500. And I posted, and I'm sure some of you laughed and thought of it yourself, because of all the planes that are crashing because of the deregulation and firing of the head of the Federal Aviation, the FAA. That, boy, wouldn't that be something if that happened to Air Force One, right? And by the way, I wonder if any of you have seen the fact that Don is back-ending budget to Elon Musk to manage Air Force One now, which is absolutely insane. Air Force One, who has been the purview of the United States Air Force, is now going to be managed by what, SpaceX and Tesla, and i.e., what I call Spectre. For those of you who've been around a while, I've kind of considered Elon Musk Spectre, the diabolical villain, the corporate chieftain in James Bond movies that was always trying to hijack the world. Oh, wow, in 2025, here we are. So before I move on to next steps, I want to pause and take a breath, and I want to give you guys an opportunity to chime in. Is there anyone out there, in addition to Roseanne and Reagan, that would like to speak? Please raise your hand and I will recognize you. I'll keep looking, and in the event that somebody wants to chime in, I'll definitely get you on board. I obviously don't want to bogart the conversation completely because I certainly have plenty to say, but I'll continue on my path forward because of just the fact that we're here. And I just would urge you all to share and get back involved with this. Ask me any questions you want to ask me privately. If there's something that doesn't make sense, but what you need to understand that I said at the outset, and that Reagan affirmed, and that everybody who has shared obviously knows, but the four questions we have to understand at the moment is, who is Patrick Lovell, the producer? Look, people, I am not trying to put myself above anybody else. I'm only doing this out of necessity. And the reason it's a necessity is because I interact all the time with legal scholars. I interact all the time with the top economists in the world. I interact with people that are as top flight as it gets. There is a professionalism within the context of these sort of spheres of influence where people do not want to step outside of their lane, and they don't want to put the composite picture together because they can't, professionally speaking. But I've been on this journey for a very long time. My journey started in 2008 after the great financial crisis, where my life was turned upside down, where previously I was living the American dream. I was a producer on a very successful television show, on a national television show. I ran a crew of about 60 people. I was involved with ensuring fabulous ratings for this operation. And I was traveling all over the country week in and week out, giving away houses to people that, and I'm using air quotes here, deserving people that had fallen on hard times to receive a free house. Our executive producers at the time was this billionaire apparatus out of Seattle that was huge into commercial real estate and residential development real estate. I knew how incredibly wealthy they were, A, by their building in downtown Seattle, and B, they were flying on a Gulfstream jet around the country, of which I was a part of on many occasions. So I was living the high life. And one day, out of the blue, in late 2007, it was the fall of 2007, I'll never forget the executive producer that was the money behind the show, that was part and parcel to kind of a sort of blended, commercial aspect of this whole thing. And my executive producer, my boss who created the show, they almost came to blows on set. And it was a show that I was producing. And I was dumbfounded. I was like, here are two professionals that seem to be on top of the world that were about to come to blows. Well, the reason was because, unbeknownst to the rest of America, including myself, we were in a massive downward death spiral of the economy that took out the developers first because of what was going on that would ultimately create the great financial crisis. Ironically, of which, again, I reemphasize, I was giving away houses to people all over the country in these like feel good stories. But as it turns out, and I didn't learn until many years later. And by the way, I was making a six-figure salary at that time, and I had my own house, my first house. I had a great, my wife, my child. We had friends. I was living on top of the world. I was about to, celebrate my 40th birthday when all of this went down. Honestly, I'm 56 now. That'll show you how long ago this was. And we had made arrangements to go to Miami with like 50 friends of mine to celebrate my 40th birthday. And then all of a sudden, September 8th, 2008 came around, that September 15th, sorry, 2008, where everybody on Wall Street collapsed. I'll never forget the news when it happened. I was like, oh my God, because I was about to sign a major deal too with another big time developer on another project that was going to have me on the gravy train for a long time. And all of a sudden, the world was imploding. And everybody who had money that I depended on to be able to produce shows and do these types of things, because that's just the way it works when you're an entrepreneur and a producer. You have to work with people of means, obviously, to seed capital to be able to get these things off the ground and distributed and everything that comes with the territory. Meanwhile, the entire globe came to an absolute standstill. And I felt like I got flung from the back of the bus all the way forward and through the windshield and run over by the bus. I was living, big expenses. I got turned upside down, inside out overnight. My money ran out within 6 months of this happening, and I couldn't find new investment. And I was going, what in the world is happening? The next thing I know, I'm thrust into this situation to where I'm going through this foreclosure process. I couldn't figure it out, but I was on the front lines because I was dealing with all of these different people in the system, and I could tell right away that nothing made sense. And I'd been around the block long enough to know that, look, if you start to go into, a downturn business wise, you can typically renegotiate terms and you can find a way through it. It could be very painful, but it's not going to destroy your life. I'd gone through a couple of situations like that before, but this was different. This was like nobody could answer a straightforward question. Nobody was helping. And I sensed that bullshit was all around me, but I couldn't figure out what the bullshit was. Well, one thing led to another. I go to this guy who's a high net worth individual in my vicinity, in my neighborhood, and somebody I knew who I just used to spend a lot of time with. And I sold him on this idea that I've got to go make a documentary to figure out what in the F is going on, because nothing made sense. And I was a producer and I knew how to ask questions. And so one thing led to another. He agreed. And when he told me, he said, look, you're trying to bite off more than I think we can chew based on the budget that you're putting forward. But what I think is interesting here is if you can figure out how we went of, by, and for the people to of, by, and for the corruption, I'm in. And thus began a 14-year odyssey to where the truth got deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and led to my next series, The Con, that you can find for free, which is the blueprint for everything that I'm telling you at www.thecon.tv, that reveals ultimately the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in history. But here's the key component of this, people, that never ended. So those of you who are looking around and going, what in the world is going on? First and foremost, how is it possible that a billionaire can hijack the democracy of the United States without breaking a sweat? How is it possible that the law means nothing? Well, because of everything that I learned on this 14-year journey that is revealing all to you, that will provide you the opportunity to see the forest for the trees, and then ultimately understand that it's just simply the emperor's new clothes. And I like to throw in the caveat on really bad acid for anybody who's ever had that experience. And ultimately, we're in the midst of Humpty Dumpty. Okay. So yeah, it's ridiculous to use children's fables to describe what has become of the greatest democracy in the history of the world, but it's useful because it's really that simple. My friends, it's not rocket science, it's racketeering. But there's a methodology how this whole thing works. And what you have to understand is that when absolute power corrupts absolutely, or excuse me, absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that when a group of men discover plunder, they create a legal code to glorify it and a moral code a legal code to authorize it and a moral code to glorify it. People, that's history. That's what's been going on for literally over 1,000 years. It's not our first rodeo. It's exactly what led to the American Revolution. In so many ways, it's exactly what the Civil War was all about and fascism. But the only difference between all of these humanistic quandaries and failures and flaws and all of the things that are the worst of our human nature, technology is the difference ultimately now. And also the level of audacity. But what's so incredible is that the truth is so easy to find and obtain, but in a sea of lies, it's nearly impossible to get there, especially with all of these artifices of these technological sort of, you know, everything from, what am I trying to say? From the algorithms and the algorithms, and then, of course, gerrymandering and all of the other types of, diabolical methodologies that the system uses to suppress votes, for example. All of these things are part and parcel to what the story is. But what this all led me to understand, and this is really the ultimate point that everybody has to get their heads around. We all know that money is God. We all know that everything functions from money. Anybody who understands anything about the economy understands that finance is a necessity. Ever since World War II, we discovered through Keynesian economics that yes, you can finance your way to a healthy economy. You can finance your way out of world wars. You can finance your way out of pandemics, especially when you understand where money comes from and how it's made. In the United States, we have a sovereign currency. We're fiat currency. We have the global reserve currency, and we can never go bankrupt under this current structure, particularly if there is demand for, treasuries among others. But until the entire world decides that dollars aren't going to be used, which might be happening at the moment because of Elon's, press with crypto and all things Russian oligarchs and Bitcoin and the scams notwithstanding, as the BRICS are trying to maneuver into position to maybe offset or reset the global reserve currency as the almighty dollar. And there's so much that would have to happen to make that happen. Primarily, the oligarchs around the world not buying in to the almighty dollar, which is kind of difficult because they're all kind of connected to the same thing. So if they're, feigning roulette, for example, and pointing the gun at themselves, it's like, don't stop or I'll shoot sort of thing. It's like there's all of these major conundrums as a result of this. But what you need to understand is that in 2009, when the global economy was grinding to a halt because they were, in air quotes, saying it was a liquidity crisis, which means what? Nobody had money. Well, why didn't they have money? Well, because they bet the house on the derivatives based on fraud, which was the housing industry that was $4.5 trillion at the time that led to an $800 trillion global wipeout. They were all busted, but they were all busted because they were all involved with the largest racketeering scheme in the history of the world based on, and I just saw your hand go up, Reagan, regarding, collateral, right? Well, what was the collateral? Well, that's all involved in the blueprint that we show you in the con, once again, to reveal the con at www.thecon.tv. And I will sidebar that, for those of you who might be a little bit like hesitant and thinking, well, how come I haven't heard of this work and how come the rest of media wasn't talking about it? So it must be suspect. People, the system is corrupt. You see it every single day at this juncture. The law doesn't matter at this juncture. So it's not a heavy lift to get to the point of what I'm telling you, that the entire system made sure that you didn't understand what it is I'm telling you. That includes the New York Times. That includes the Washington Post. That includes, unfortunately, the Obama administration and everything that came since. Because in the aftermath of this wipeout, when the liquidity had dried up because of the world's largest racketeering scheme, which is fraud, which is crime, and by the way, we have remedies for that, which is called RICO, racketeering, influence, corrupt organization acts that were designed to deal with the multifaceted organizational crime of the mafia. And what the financial system did was the exact same thing. But when it blew up, nobody knew what they did because it was too overwhelming and all the fingers were pointing in every single direction. And what literally happened was a dog and pony show where we got the supposed, through the mainstream media, this emergency bailout through Congress, which was $700 billion in an operation known as the Troubled Assets Relief Program. And everybody at that time's jaw hit the floor because they were like, $700 billion to Wall Street for what? What are you talking about? And all of those sorts of scenarios. And meanwhile, what literally took place was there was 98 secret meetings that took shape during this time period between when Bush was president and Obama was president, and then about a year and a half into Obama's presidency, where the Federal Reserve and the Secretary of the Treasury were meeting behind closed doors to lay out what I'm about to tell you. They used what was a relatively unknown statute called Federal Reserve Act 13.3 that was designed after the Great Depression to create a government-sponsored enterprise to create a rebound to the Depression through public works projects that were funded by government that could use private investment to create, to float the economy. And so ultimately, that was part and parcel to what led to, through Keynesian economics, the ability to fund our way out of this for public works projects that accompanied the New Deal. Okay? And then, of course, we had World War II afterwards, which there was, of course, a lot of supply or demand for military and the budgeting for that. And we had the productive capacity to do that. So we did that and we sold bonds to offset it. But at the same time, we had what was known as the Glass-Steagall Act. And then we developed the Securities and Exchange Commission, which were the police to make sure that crooks couldn't run our economy. Because when you allow crooks to run the dealership, right, or the dealers at the table and everything else, and they can count cards, they're going to cheat. They're going to lie, steal, and cheat. And so everybody knows that. That's just what happens when you deal with crooks. And that's what they did, unless you have laws that can hold those crooks accountable. And then you build bulwarks against the ability to create, fraud on a wide scale basis. And so that's what took place at that time to get us out of the Great Depression, which enabled the New Deal. So fast forward to 2009, and suddenly they took the ability of the federal government in the full faith and credit of the United States. And you got to be aware, in between, we got off the gold standard, we got on the fiat currency standard at Bretton Woods in 1971, which many regard as a commodity sort of, the commodity standard by way of oil, mostly. And ultimately, they used that to expand the credit box so that they could provide not $700 billion to this incredible organized crime syndicate that was our financial, Wall Street financial model during this time period. And I'm talking now 2009. We provided them $33 trillion. Now, for those of you who know math, you know that there is 1,000 billion in a trillion. So we gave them $33 trillion, okay? Then we provided another $16 trillion between 2011, 12 to 2016 in what was known as quantitative easing. And there's a way that works, and I'm happy to answer those questions for those of you who might have them. But ultimately, that's $49 trillion by 2016. In 2019, we had another global catastrophe that nobody knows about. There was a massive run on repo loans, which is overnight lending based on collateral, which is the exact same thing that tripwired the 2008 great financial crisis. Because as many of you might remember the movie The Big Short, what was going on was all the players knew that the collateral was worth nothing, and Goldman Sachs created a run at Bear Stearns that triggered the entirety of the 2008 great financial crisis that ultimately they shorted. And they wanted to tripwire the market because they could collect on the shorts, but that was kind of a smoke and mirrors, if you want to know the truth, because it was Goldman Sachs that knew that they could expand the credit bubble of Federal Reserve Act 13.3. How do I know that? Well, I would welcome you and encourage you to go to Patrick Lovell, Truth Bombs the Con. Sorry. Patrick Lovell presents the Clean New Deal. Click on what is known as the white papers and look into the Federal Reserve Act 13.3. And at the very top, I posted an interview with a gentleman by the name of Raj Cohen, who was the partner at a law firm called Sullivan and Cromwell. And Sullivan and Cromwell is the law firm that created, incidentally, the CIA. And he was coincidentally put in charge to clean up the madness of what took place in 2008. And he said to the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission that none of the major media ever reported on, such as the New York Times, Rachel Maddow, everybody else. He says to the Financial Credit Inquiry Commission that they had to expand the bubble or the box because they didn't know how deep the derivatives went. So he acknowledged what the entirety of the fraud mechanism was, which led to this $33 trillion that was showered upon the crime bosses that would go on to destroy tens of millions of Americans and my job. And then that led me to foreclosure. And that's how I got there, by understanding all of these things. That took me years and years and millions of dollars to be able to penetrate and to figure out what the experts that Reagan had pointed out that I have access to, which I do. It's not just about me. I'm just a conduit to the guys who actually have all of this information and the capacity and the ability to thwart all this stuff. If only millions of us came together to rise above the madness of deception and corruption, to force the truth into the darkness, the light of truth into the darkness. And so that was, I took us up to 2019 because there was a run on the global repo markets based on a trigger from Japan SoftBank that led to another $22 trillion that was poofed into the financial markets to float the financial markets because they had done the exact same thing they did in 2009. And then ultimately, that was before COVID. Now, for any of you guys who understand Dodd-Frank and the laws that took place after the great financial crisis, the PR was, oh, we've got 1,200 pages of figuring out how to never let that happen again, even though we're not going to tell you what happened. So, for example, the likes of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have been out there forever going, oh yeah, we got the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, we got Dodd-Frank, we figured out how not to let this happen again. Meanwhile, it was happening the entire time. Nobody fixed anything because nobody knew what was going on. And by the way, Eric Holder's Justice Department lays out everything I'm telling you succinctly and clearly, and all the civil fraud settlements with the Justice Department and the too big to fail banks, where they got $250 billion in fines, and everybody wanted to call it good because they were like, oh, we extracted a pound of flesh from the bad guys. No, we didn't. We gave them $71 trillion for them to pay $250 billion. Now, are you beginning to see the light? Now, those who want to go off on the deep end and in the netherworlds, look, the entirety of Epstein in the intelligence and Epstein Island and all the sycophantic sick that was going on with everybody for power and blah blah blah. What nobody understands is that it was the too big to fail banks that were laundering the money and providing the financing for all things Epstein. Okay. And of course, Trump was involved with that mix as well, right? And of course, you know that all the MAGAs are like, hey, kill all of the what do we call them if you sleep with a child? I mean, a pedophile. Even though Trump is on with young girls all over the place. I mean, it's just a sidebar to say that the rot in the corruption and the deception runs extremely deep in a lot of very, very, very bad places, by the way. But what I'm providing you is the overview that enables all of this stuff to continue to flow. Now, what do you guys think would happen when you give billionaires who raped and destroyed millions of people by roofing them with the American dream? And yeah, well, there are a lot of people that got in over their heads that have no idea how finance works, that have no idea how real estate works, that got in more than they understood, and they were flipping houses and they bought more houses they can afford, and all of those things that a lot of people looked at them as like, you're the idiots that created the problem. No, they were set up with poison rat cheese on a rat trap that they didn't understand first and foremost. Does that make them likable where you have empathy towards them? No. What about the pensioners that worked their whole lives that invested in the mortgage-backed securities unknowingly because money managers at all of these major financial houses threw all of their portfolios into these toxic assets. How about them? They had nothing. Knew nothing. Anyway, the point is that there was millions of people that got caught up in this, mostly people who had no idea what was going on, and a smattering of idiots that, are all going to happen when you have widespread fraud like this. But the point is that it was all designed under what we call control fraud, based on what we call modern executive compensation, to feed the kitty of bonuses for CEOs that are dictators through fraud based on deception that destroyed everybody. And oh yeah, by the way, millions of cases went through the courts, and the courts were complicit in the fraud. So here we are with Doge. Here we are with all of these criminals, Trump being a criminal for 4 or 5 decades, having the audacity to say, we're going to root out waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption. How fresh is that? Waste, fraud, and corruption. Are you kidding me? These guys are the embodiment of waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption, right? But again, this enables the formula of Donald Trump, i.e., lie, deny, switch the blame, and implicate, to be able to, pull the wool over the eyes of the millions of people that got screwed by what I'm telling you, that would go to MAGA because they're just too stupid to see the forest for the trees, right? And ultimately, they're like, we don't even care anymore. As long as the white guy prevails over everybody else, they can steal as much money as they want, because LBJ taught this to us a long time ago when he said, if you can convince the lowest rung white guy that he's higher on the ladder than the highest rung black guy, you can pick his pockets all day. Does that not make all of this other stuff make sense? So what I'm revealing to you was literally $71 trillion illegally to the largest racketeering in the history of the world, that led to billionaires who created the madness to get away with the crime. So what do you think they would do? Do you think they'd stop? Or do you think they'd double down? They'd been doubling down the entirety of the time period, okay? That's why we have no law, because we have revolving door, because the methodology of Citizens United, to where these rat bastard billionaires that are operating in the shadows in their apparatuses can steal trillions of dollars, be above the law and market forces, untouchable, and then they pay for their goons in the legislature to be able to carry out their whims, as well as in the judiciary. The Supreme Court, it's corruption. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. This is history in a nutshell. That's what we're involved with. And ultimately, the Clean New Deal, based on all of that, is the remedy to what it is that I just laid out to you, that is creating all that we're in the midst of. And yeah, it's the end of times, my friend. I'm not a religious guy. I'm not even close to a religious zealot, but I do find it fresh and interesting when you consider the nature of Armageddon and rapture, the idea that it's going to be the world of the wicked that's going to have to be wiped out by the forces of God, integrity, light. That's the idea of it. What are we in the midst of? What is ironically, what is Donald Trump, right? Well, what are going to get all of these Christo-fascists at the Church of Satan to lie, steal, and cheat? I mean, that's what is happening in the most massive, like, incredibly clear way that everybody can see. And then, of course, nobody can stop, right? And if it's interesting, those of you who are listening to this live on X, I'm recording this and I'm going to post this to my YouTube channel. I just discovered there's a bunch of deer behind me in my backyard staring at me and listening. So look, even the good creatures of the world know what I'm speaking is truth, right? So this is absolutely cool, man, that just happened. So my friends, before I get into what the Clean New Deal is and how we power our way through this and out of this, I want to pause and I want to ask anybody out there listening, if you have any questions, if you want to challenge me on anything that I've stated so far, or if you need any clarity if I've gone too fast, please raise your hand and I'd love to hear what you have to say. And I'll put it to anyone, even Roseanne and Reagan, and also Juan. I see you're still here. Thank you, Juan. Does anybody want to respond to what I'm saying so that others out there can hear, what regular people are responding to the kind of things that I'm laying out? So I'm going to recognize Reagan right away. In fact, I think you're already there. I think you can speak, Reagan.
I guess so. I wanted to just add a couple of reasons how you know that Patrick is telling the truth, how you know he has some sort of insight. Because if he wasn't a snake oil salesman, then he could help solve a lot of mysteries. The sort of mysteries he was faced with 16 years ago, the sort of mysteries we're all faced with at this moment. And two of the mysteries that Patrick's insights have helped me solve, and I've only just realized on this call how much it ties back to Federal Reserve 13.3. And let me suggest that is a mechanism of imperialism. Let me suggest that's a way you take foreign loot and you bring it and you just print it in greenbacks at home. And those debts get repaid by the foreigners like us up here in Alberta, where we have all the oil, but we don't get any of the money. And Patrick's helped me solve the mystery of where the loans for all those bad loans that blew up in 2007 came from. The collateral was from Alberta. It was from Canada. It was using the oil. And the reason they were so happy to give out bad loans is because they were going to get repaid with Alberta oil production tomorrow. And so there wasn't really any money to be lost, and that's what fueled it. And 13.3 has for a century prospectively been used towards Alberta almost being used, and it wasn't until 2007 where they finally pulled the trigger and Alberta was in their clutches. That's what is fueling this over and over. And there's the mystery of where did those thousands of billionaires now terrorizing you domestically? They've been terrorizing the rest of the world forever, but they've really multiplied. And I'd like to suggest they come from Alberta. They come from the oil, 4 million barrels a day, of which us locals here get next to nothing of. That's where it is, and that's the sort of cash flow available to the honest people to build a better future if we could stop these crimes.
Well, and one thing I just recognized as you were saying that is, this whole drill, baby, drill conundrum. I mean, you guys might remember to the last couple of months of the Obama administration when there was all of the protests on the Indian tribal lands in Dakota based on the Alberta pipelines, right? And so, all the mechanisms that are involved in the fossil fuel industry and then the financial industry. And you've got to also compositely understand that back in 2019, Saudi Aramco became the largest IPO in the history of the world and is also now the most valuable company in the world, more so than Apple. But when you think about Alberta and the future production, somebody's got to be inside Trump's ear that's like, look, if we're going to build this, further sort of immersion, I should say, entrenchment of the fossil fuel financial industry that's really been in control of everything, I say, since 9/11, right? I mean, they have been the whole time, but 9/11 was a big part of it that got us into 20 years of war for this further this ends. We could have gotten on renewable energy years and years ago. But ultimately, technology wise, we had all the answers back in the late 90s. And I think that's part and parcel why all of this stuff has happened, to reveal the emperor's new clothes, because all the same people, we saw that in this, divvying up of Ukraine yesterday without Zelensky, because you've got the Russians, you've got, Trump's missionaries of oil, quite frankly, through our State Department, and then Saudi Arabia and everything that they constitute. When you consider, for example, okay, well, do we have enough oil to last their lifetimes? Do they give a shit if they destroy the world in the process? Ask yourself what Trump cares about when he's on the golf course. My God, it's so obvious and nobody's stopping them. Okay. And so, by the way, just to kind of reboot this notion of $71 trillion that we can prove, this isn't hyperbole. This isn't theorizing. I've got all of the evidence of what it is that I'm speaking to you about. And for those of you who are listening to this for the first time, you should be absolutely mind blown that a guy by the name of Patrick Lovell, who you've never heard of, is revealing what the sum total of the entirety of the Department of Justice, the FBI, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the AGs around the country could never reveal to you. And they've got a sum total of a budget of about $90 billion a year, not to mention the New York Times and Rachel Maddow and everybody in so-called, let's call mainstream media, didn't reveal. And so they made themselves vulnerable with Trump, the ultimate guy who is involved with this stuff from day one. Okay, you got to understand that the 91 indictments that the federal government was bringing down on Trump throughout the last 2 years, and of course Merrick Garland started it late, but and it was the reason why the Supreme Court could, give Trump a way out to, steal the election, which I'm absolutely convinced they did. The nature of Trump's indictments were the sum total of defrauding the United States, using deceptive acts and practices, falsifying business records, and forgeries along many lines, but particularly in trying to steal the Electoral College. Okay? So that was the exact same thing that Wall Street did in the great financial crisis, but the difference was, instead of it being one guy, that the federal government with this $90 billion a year apparatus could not do the dragnet to take down Trump. What I'm revealing to you involved tens of thousands of people involved with tens of millions of felonies, not just from the financial apparatus, but also in the judiciary on the back end to use the same methodology to lie, steal, and cheat their way to basically rape and pillage and, imperialism, smash and grab. They floated the real estate through this methodology that I'm revealing to you. If that doesn't make you want to go freaking nuts and join this unit, I don't know what else can, because how many innocent people that are desperate for healthcare, that are in the streets, that have had their lives destroyed, can have some sort of modicum of assistance to get them in a place to become productive in society. It would be minuscule. It'd be 1.01% of $71 trillion. How about rebooting the entire world with, or the United States first, but with the energy, paradigm, renewable energy paradigm, and so forth? We don't have to wonder where we get the money. We can get the money at any time. The fact of the matter is, the guys that are getting the money are the ones that are raping and pillaging everyone, as if we all got into a P. Diddy cave of freak off. That's what they're doing. They're freaking off on the law and the economy. It's so unbelievably easy to understand when you have all of the details. And so now I'm going to move into the remedy, which is the Clean New Deal. Is there anyone that has any questions, who want to challenge me, who want to provide anything of perspective of how you're interpreting this and what's important to you, for example? Anyone, please, anyone, feel that we're amongst friends here, guys. There's nothing that you could say that would be embarrassing. Roseanne, let me invite you on real quick to see if you can add something to this before I move into the to the Clean New Deal.
Sure, Patrick. Thanks. Patrick and I have been working together about going on 5 years. Reagan and Patrick are much more, I wouldn't say, they're deep thinkers. I think a lot, but the fact of the matter is, I have had the idea of corruption inside my head since I've been about 10 years old. I'm 75 now. That's a long time. I knew what corruption did to people. I knew the political machine, the church, the businesses, everybody, the mafia guys, they were all in it together. So what happens to me? 5 years ago, I meet Patrick. I see episode 1, just the first episode of the con, and it's like, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for. I needed not just the particular who, what, when, and why that I saw, but I needed the big picture that Patrick captures. And I'm going to tell you, folks, I've become friends with a number of the people who are in the con, who are way above my pay grade, who consider me friends and tell me, Roseanne, you get it. Why? Why do I get it? Why did the con hit me so powerfully with episode 1? Because it's the truth. It's the facts. It's not Patrick simply talking. No, Patrick went to the people who were there. He went to Bill Black, who was responsible with his team for making 30,000 referrals.
Criminal referrals.
Pardon me?
Criminal referrals that would then lead to 1,700 convictions.
And they got 1,700 convictions, right?
For the savings and loan crisis.
Now, so Patrick goes to the man, Bill Black, who knows how to get the job done. And Patrick and Bill Black worked together, and you can see Bill Black with Patrick on a number of our videos that are on our YouTube channel, okay? But the only point I want to make is this. People need to take time to learn the details. But like me, fortunately, when you've got it in your gut, when you have this whole context of the lies that have been all around you, of the corruption, of seeing how people in the city of Chicago were treated. If you have any context of corruption and you watch the con first, because it is the blueprint, you watch that and all the details, what every detail of all the material that Patrick's put together and we got on the website, it becomes clearer and clearer and clearer, and you cannot stop that light from shining through.
Well said, Roseanne. Look, the bottom line is the con is literally the most dangerous information that exists that has not been quashed, and there's a lot of reasons. Well, it hasn't been erased from history, thank God. Okay, it's still there. Once again, www.thecon.tv, and it's free. It's free because all of the American people buy our lies. Guys, the crisis is absolutely absurd. It's stupid that the truth is right in front of everybody, eyes wide shut. I mean, that's the whole situation. You cannot fix a problem. You can't solve a disease unless you know what creates the disease. And that's what we did with this whole thing, thanks to, as Roseanne had so eloquently put forth, that, look, this guy, William K. Black, is a name that should go down in history. There should be a statue on the National Mall right up there with Martin Luther King and Thomas Jefferson and, quite frankly, Abraham Lincoln, because there is a method to corporate fraud, okay? And again, like I mentioned at the outset of this, going back to the 80s, and this has been long before that, but I'm just talking about the most recent sort of incarnation in history, is that in corporations, they use asymmetric information to create all sorts of smoke and mirrors so that you can't understand the full scenario. And a lot of times, like Lloyd Blankfein said to Senator Levin in the hearings where they were, putting all this stuff forth that never got followed up with the full investigation, was that, the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing for a reason. When you can keep everybody in the dark, well, then you can be the puppet master. I think we all know that intuitively. That's why we have the law. But the law requires discovery. So when I say that we've got the truth that can take it all down, what we're talking about isn't philosophical truth. We're not talking about, ideology. We're not talking about, hyperbole. We're not talking about theory. We're talking about discovery, which is the whole aspect of why you have a legal system to begin with, like to prove somebody who did murder, right? And so on and so forth. It's the same composite stuff. But what I'm revealing to you is what the entirety of the system that gets paid $90 billion a year to bring this forward didn't. And that's why we're in the disaster zone that we are. Okay. So moving forward with the Clean New Deal, you've got to ask yourself 4 questions. Okay. The first, and I'd like you to see you raise your hands if you know what it is when I pose the question, and I won't ask you to answer the question. I just want to see if anybody knows what I mean when I ask, what is qualified immunity? Does anybody know what qualified immunity is? I won't ask you. I just want to see if you can raise your hand to tell me whether or not you know what it is. I know Roseanne and Reagan know what qualified immunity are, and you haven't raised your hand, so you're probably doing something else. Does anybody else know what qualified immunity is? Okay, it looks like we've got somebody. Thank you for that. Anyone else? And I see it's orange. I can't see the total name here. It looks like organic democracy. Fantastic. Thank you for saying that you know what that is. So, guys, as it relates to qualified immunity, for example, if your big issue happens to be because you're African American or you were swept up in the Black Lives Matter scenario after George Floyd was murdered, and you understand all that led to, Colin Kaepernick and everything else, what we're talking about is that the police can shoot to kill, and they don't have to justify themselves. There's a reason for that by way of insurance and the way that we budget police stations and so forth. But it's a far cry from a police officer that is shooting a bank robber, after shooting somebody and trying to make a getaway, or let's say a terrorist that is, going to blow up a building. There's a far difference between that methodology in the line of fire in service and duty to, of course, maybe having it out for somebody that they don't like because they're black, which happens and has happened a lot, right? Qualified immunity gives police officers the ability to not be tried for murder, which puts them above the law. So I'll ask the same question about judges. Does anybody know what judicial immunity is? Just by raise of hands. Right? Anybody judicial immunity? Anybody want to, given what I just said about qualified immunity in the police, you obviously know that judicial immunity puts the judges above criminal prosecution. Now, in a country that is designed where the law is supreme, is that a little bit peculiar? How could those who administer the law, supposedly umpires who call balls and strikes, who aren't activist judges or who aren't working for a corrupt machine or anything else, how can it be possible just on the objective facts and the merits that judges are above the law? Anybody want to tell me that they're cool with that? If you think democracy based on the rule of law is what the founders had intended after a revolution, given all things what we learned about what went into the Constitution and the Bill of Rights because of the way law was administered by King George III, who, by the way, Trump said today, again, that the law is what he and the Attorney General say it is. Does anybody not know that's what just happened today? To bring it full circle, I mean, are we talking about something that's centuries old that, has no relevance? No, it happened today. So Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, who I respect and I think is a great guy, but he's been out there on the trail talking about how we have to have ethics for the Supreme Court justices. Do you think we should have ethics for Supreme Court justices who are getting backdoored corrupt money from billionaires, some of which are literally neo-Nazis, to provide the president's presidential immunity. Do we think they should be above the law? I don't. I think that's absolutely insane because, again, when you have a president that's above the law, when you have Supreme Court justices that are above the law, and you have the police that are above the law, what does that tell you about the law? That the law is not supreme. That those in power administering the law are supreme and above the law, which is absolutely insane. And then, so wait a second, don't we have a democracy to be able to hold that to account? Well, we saw what happened in 2020 and we saw what happened in 2024. But the long-going facade of our democracy has always been, and I understand why the founders did it with the, the Constitutional Convention and all that sort of stuff back in 1787. But the Electoral College, guys, is absolutely an abomination of democracy because, as the Republicans like to point out to us all the time, we live in a constitutional republic or representative democracy of which those who we elect to rule over this are the final arbiter of our democracy, supposedly, right? But now add in, for example, what happens when you have Citizens United when dark money can pay infinitely for the revolving door and those that are in our government? Again, a lot of this stuff manifests from the nature of the perversion of democracy, which is the perversion of power, which is a facade. So the way the Clean New Deal works is when you have the four aspects of that Rubik's Cube of power, i.e. what is qualified immunity, what is judicial immunity, what is presidential immunity, and what is the Electoral College, really. You can come to understand based on what I'm revealing to you, particularly as it relates to like what we've talked about for the last hour. First and foremost, we have to create a new Glass-Steagall Act. Glass-Steagall is what we created after the Great Depression that led to the Securities and Exchange Commission that mandated that commercial banks could not gamble with other people's money, and there had to be a separation with retail banks. I should say not commercial banks. I should say investment banks, okay? Investment banks from commercial banks. There had to be a separation because what they did to create the Great Depression was they gambled with other people's money. And we learned, oh, wait, that's not a good idea because of what FDR said when he created the New Deal, when he said a government of, for, and by organized crime is organized crime. If it looks like shit, smells like shit, tastes like shit, is shit. That's the whole idea. And so the caveat based on everything I'm telling you with Federal Reserve Act 13.3 is that we've got to create a new Glass-Steagall where you have separation of investment banking because you need finance, and you have to have commercial banks to be able to make life work in a civilized society, but you can't have them as basically thieves to steal everybody's money to destroy them, which is what we did in 2008-9, which is what we did during the Great Depression, which we've done ever since. So you can't have the opportunity to gamble with other people's money that is backstopped by the full faith and credit of the United States for racketeering. Does anybody disagree with that? Does anybody think that's a stupid idea? Does anybody think what I just said was ridiculous because you can't even believe that's a possibility? I'm looking at your hands. I appreciate you all here, but I'm going to raise my hand and I'm going to say, yeah, no, it's absolutely insane. Never in a million years, if I didn't go on the journey that I did, would I believe that the full faith and credit of the United States, even though its statutes say exactly what you can't do, i.e. speculate in commodities, i.e. real estate, which is exactly what we did. We made $71 trillion available to the guys that destroyed the world. Now, can you see the problem? So that's step one. Step two is you got to eradicate Citizens United. What happens good in the dark? Ask people that went to P. Diddy parties that got roofied and raped, and trained by people in the dark. I mean, people, you cannot allow dark money influence to happen. Otherwise, chaos is going to ensue. That's exactly what Citizens United has done. And we're going to, as a third precept of the Clean New Deal, we're going to demonstrate how the $71 trillion was spent, where and how and for who, versus all of the things that $71 trillion could go to as a starting point. And then ultimately, you've got to create 13 justices now to answer for the Roberts and McConnell corruption and the revolving door of the corrupt kangaroo court of, Clarence Thomas and Alito and Roberts and Kavanaugh and Roberts, right? Did I say Roberts? Yeah, Roberts. And who am I missing? Warren. Sorry. Wait a second. Anyway, I think of her name. I got her name confused. Amy Barrett. Sorry. And then ultimately, because the 6-3 decision based on what we've got, we're stuck with this for how long? And what are they? The Supreme Court's going to rule on all of these executive orders that are unconstitutional. But so was 14th Amendment Section 3. They don't care. They're corrupt. So we've got to be able to create this balance in the short term, but you got to end qualified immunity. You got to end judicial immunity and presidential immunity. And then finally, you got to, absolve the Electoral College. There's no reason why the state of Wyoming, with an exorbitant amount of billionaires, should have as much legislative influence than, of course, the state of California with 50 million people. And then, like Biden said on the way out, when he finally, after 50 years of being involved with the revolving door and, all things LLCs in Delaware and everything that basically prison industrial complex and corporate America said on the way out, oh, yeah, by the way, we're an oligarchy. It's up to you, America, to do what you did in the past when we got trust busting through the New Deal. That's what I'm telling you. That this is what I'm doing is trust busting through the New Deal in the form of the clean New Deal. And then Biden said, you got to stop Congress from being able to insider trade. Oh, hello. And then finally, term limits. Because guys like McConnell can have such entrenched power where they can stand in the House of the Congress, basically, with a lockjaw because of his dementia and everything else, and still do a workaround later when he comes to be in drugs and whatever to get back in the game to create corruption. Yeah. Okay. So is democracy perfect? No. Is it better than fascism? Oh, hell yeah. And so people, when you understand the blueprint of corruption through how Federal Reserve Act 13.3 mandate that basically made Congress irrelevant. If you know anything about our separation of powers, and what we're hearing about a lot right now is that Congress has the power of the purse. Does Congress have the power of the purse if the financial industry can get trillions of dollars of money from M1, M2, and all sorts of emergency lending apparatuses for fraud from the Federal Reserve? Yeah, it's a stupid question. But that's what nobody is telling you, that I'm telling you. And so it all leads to manifest the clean New Deal. Now, finally, guys, this isn't going to happen overnight, all right? I think it might be too late, to be honest with you, because I don't think we're ever going to see another election, honestly. Do you think we're going to see another election because of what we saw from the insurrection through this last election, if they can get away with suppressing 3.5 million votes that we've audited and nobody's talking about it in mainstream? Why did Biden shake hands with Trump in the Oval Office and, Harris not say anything, honestly? How is it possible that nobody was like, wait a second, given all of the stuff that MAGA did following, in Fox paid $750 million for admitting that it lied about the big lie. But that's their business model and nobody stopped them. It's like, hello, what? So if Trump has all the cards and the military and the FBI and the Treasury, of which they've all completely infiltrated illegally, and the Supreme Court, my friends, are we going to have another fair election? Or is it going to be what we've seen in Putin's Russia since what? Did Putin take over in 1998, roughly? And the final piece of the equation with Putin, many of you might be like, well, why does Putin have it out for the United States so bad? You should be aware that in 1998, a firm called Long-Term Capital Management, who were the forerunners of all things derivatives because they were all quants, bankrupted the ruble on derivatives trades based on all the methodology that I just laid out to you that bankrupted the Soviet Union. Do you think that Putin might have a long view? He was KGB and intelligence, of course, but it's ridiculous because the economy of Russia right now is like, what, 25th in the world? It's about the size of Texas. They're not a superpower like they once were. Now, do they have nuclear weapons? Can they create all sorts of problems? Outstandingly, yes. I'm sorry, I don't even know what adjective I want to put in there. Absolutely is what I meant to say. But the fact is, they were able to use all of this intelligence apparatus with working with our billionaires like the Mercers and Adelsons and all of these other guys on this global spectrum, and now Elon Musk, to basically go from Prigozhin and all that stuff with IBM back in 2016, and then they just double down on it during the 2025 election. And does Putin have control? My God, it's so self-evident, it's unbelievable, and again, I was wondering, what does he have on Elon Musk? Well, it might be just, the rare earth minerals in in Ukraine that was enough to turn Musk. I don't know. Musk is just absolutely insane. But the bottom line is that we are going to have to get the truth to millions upon millions of Americans that have got to know, in addition to what they all sense, that the system is rigged and it's corrupt and it's, for the people that are in control, right? We've been saying that for, I think, 20 years ish, right? But nobody knows who did what, when, and how. I just laid it out for you. And there's more. And we've got it at www.thecon.tv. We've got it at thecleannewdeal.org. But we need warriors for justice that want to save our democracy and the world for liberty and justice for all. And for that to happen, you must become a nuclear reaction vector to the big bang of truth that I am revealing to you. This is what the billionaire class cannot have millions understand, that everybody just instinctually knows, but they're going to be like, well, what are we supposed to do about it? They get lost. I just laid out the clean new deal, but how are we going to actually do it? Are we going to go do the same thing that Mangione did, by pulling out a semi and going to track down a CEO of a healthcare company and assassinating him on Park Avenue? No, we don't need to do that yet. No, we don't need to do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to have anything to do with it. What I am suggesting to you is I want to redeem the dream by resuscitating the law so that the law can take out the bad players of corruption and rip back all the money they stole, throw their ass in prison, and then cleanse the system through the Clean New Deal. It's what we would do if we had cancer. You use, and I went through it last year. You have to go through chemo. This is chemo. The truth is chemo. But going back to my final point on all this stuff is that, guys, regardless of what your religious position is, your methodology of life and how you go through this and what you think about and everything else, in the face of massive corruption, the founders knew the citizens were the last backstop. We still have a tiny, tiny degree because we're using the systems, right, that are trying to quash us completely. And by the way, I got quashed by BlackRock and now Elon. So it's up to you guys to become vectors of this information, to get it out there. And yeah, I have to be the guy that delivers it because I'm the only guy that can tell the whole story soup to nuts. And again, I hope that millions of us can do that so I don't have to anymore, to be quite frank with you. But we have to be able to rally millions of people, and we have to make demonstrations around the country in addition to those that are willing to go out there and say no more Nazis, quite frankly, because corruption burns and fuels fascism. We got to do it all over the country. But my end game is before the next midterm election, and maybe this summer and maybe the following summer, but building and building and building and building until a crescendo where we overwhelm the madness of corruption before it destroys us all, because it's going to take tens of millions of us showing up, honestly. My vision has always been that we show up in Washington, D.C., we peacefully surround all of the institutions that have now become absolutely corrupt, from the Department of Justice to the FBI to the Federal Reserve, and of course the Supreme Court above all else, and then the White House and Congress. And we have millions of people chanting the Clean New Deal and everything that comes with it. And then we exodus together in unison to the National Mall, where under the gaze of Abraham Lincoln, who said, "A nation of, by, and for the people shall not perish from the earth," across from the reflecting pool from Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice." There we will present to the world everything I just presented to you now. But I'm the producer, and I promise you, if we have the ability to get there and we have the resources, which we will build to, we can do it in a way that will blow the world's minds. But more importantly, like our friend Reagan said, none of this can change anything around the world unless we get it done in the United States. The United States is the indispensable power for democracy. And my God, if you would have told me 20 years ago that a judge in Brazil would have more integrity towards democracy than the sum total of the Supreme Court, like we saw demonstrated in what's going on with Bolsonaro and everything down in Brazil and against Elon Musk, I'd say you were nuts, given what I know about Brazil. But that's how bad the United States is right now. So my friends, thank you for tuning in. I from the bottom of my heart, it just means the world to me that you guys have shown up for this. We've got the answers. We can do this. We just need you. We need to recruit people. And again, I'm always available for questions at any time. And if you want to challenge me on this, on anything that I've stated, I'll lead you in the direction that you can find it. But again, check out the con at www.thecon.tv and the Clean New Deal at www.thecleannewdeal.org. And this is the final statement. I forgot this, right? So this is the universal truth. Light overcomes darkness with the energy of the supernova. That's what I'm trying to tell you, you all are. You're the nuclear reaction that forces light into darkness, because when you live in truth, you live in light. When you live a lie, you're depraved. When you have the truth, you are bulletproof. When you live a lie, inside you die. Stop lying. Stop buying lies. The truth is our savior. Onwards and upwards. Thank you for joining. All the best. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Check it out on X, on Spaces. Spread this around as much as you can. Thank you to all who joined. Look, the deer are still there. Would the deer still be there? Think about that, for example. What would the deer do if Donald Trump was talking? They'd run. Onwards and upwards, my friends. All the best.